She had a great many grandchildren, and she wasn't equal in her love for them. Everyone inside the household knew it, even if no one said it at the dinner table. There was one she could never refuse, handsome, cocksure Andrew. And there were the others, the ones who got the correct affection of a grandmother performing the role, but not the helpless, doting, rule-bending warmth she saved for her favorite. Now, the record is genuinely divided about exactly who sat at the very center of her heart. Gareth Russell, the historian who wrote "Do Let's Have Another Drink," his account of the Queen Mother's life and wit, focuses closely on her bond with Prince Charles. The surrogate-mother relationship, the time Charles spent at Clarence House when his own parents were away on Commonwealth tours, the way she nurtured his artistic temperament when his parents couldn't or wouldn't. As Russell told People magazine ahead of the book's release, the Queen Mother was in some ways a mother figure to Charles, precisely because the Queen became queen when Charles was so young, and every time she had to leave on tour, Charles stayed with his grandmother. They had a great sense of humor, and she always encouraged him. But hold that lightly, because the popular record, the one you'll find in 100 comment sections and a dozen YouTube titles, insists just as firmly on a different name. Andrew, the handsome one, born in February 1960, who had charm and ease and lit up a room in ways his brother sometimes struggled to. Both sides of this argument have evidence. Neither can be settled with certainty from the biographical record alone, and this video won't pretend otherwise. The honest answer is that we don't know for certain. What we do know, what is documented and attested, is this: the Queen Mother's love was an inheritance in itself, and she dispensed it unevenly. The grandchild who stood closest to that fire received something specific: her certainty, her entitlement, her bottomless conviction that welcome was owed to her wherever she went. The grandchildren who stood further from the warmth received less, and were, strange as it sounds, set free by the shortfall. That is the interpretive frame this video is working from. It's a framework for understanding documented evidence, not a psychological verdict. The facts about the Queen Mother's character are solid. The facts about Andrew's behavior are documented. What we're arguing is a pattern, the mechanism by which love, when it transmits only the appetite without the discipline, becomes something much less kind than love. This is the story of a grandmother who chose, and of what the choosing did to the chosen. She was born Elizabeth Bowes Lyon on August 4, 1900, the 9th child of the Earl of Strathmore. She became Queen Consort in 1937, Queen Mother in 1952, and by the time she died on March 30, 2002, she had outlived not just her husband, but virtually everyone who remembered the world she'd been born into. She was 101. No other king or queen in British history had lived so long. The public image was everything: the pastels, the pearls, the unrelenting smile. ABC News called her possibly the best-loved member of the royal family. Harold Nicholson called her the greatest queen since Cleopatra. She had, in Stephen Tennant's formulation, captured with unusual precision in Hugo Vickers's 2005 biography, a quality that few people articulated honestly. She looked everything that she wasn't: gentle, gullible, tenderness mingled with dispassionate serenity, cool, well-bred, remote. Behind this veil, she schemed and vacillated, hard as nails. The private character that biographers assembled, once the papers were opened, was somewhat different from the public one. William Shawcross spent years on the official biography, published in 2009. 1,100 pages, access to the Royal Archives, Palace authorized. Even he, writing from a broadly sympathetic position, documented what he described as a strong sense of entitlement to royal privilege, an expectation of deference from staff and courtiers that contrasted with her benign public persona, and a formidable, controlling presence in family matters. Anne Glenconner, who spent decades as Princess Margaret's lady-in-waiting and knew the wider royal circle intimately, put it more directly in her 2019 memoir, Lady-in-Waiting. Charming and fun in company, but capable of being sharp, demanding, and very conscious of status. People were frozen out if they displeased her. Her warmth had a trap door. The finances tell the story most plainly. When the Queen Mother died in 2002, her account at Coutts showed an overdraft of roughly £4 million. Her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, covered the debt from private funds. The public purse had already been contributing £643,000 a year to maintain the Queen Mother's household, a staff of more than 40, multiple residences, racing strings, the Castle of May in Caithness. The Queen reportedly joked in private, "Coutts would have folded long ago but for Mummy's account." The charm made it survivable. For her, it always did. A temperament that would have been insufferable in anyone else became, in her hands, the subject of fond anecdote. The smile disarmed, the pink gin smoothed it over. She had spent a century deploying that arsenal with extraordinary skill. But charm isn't inherited. Appetite is. The question of which grandchild specifically absorbed most of what she had to give is worth examining honestly. And again, the record is divided. The Charles case is made strongly by the biographical consensus. When Elizabeth became queen in 1952, Charles was 3 years old. The Commonwealth tours that followed, sometimes 6 months at a stretch, meant the young prince spent extended time at Clarence House under his grandmother's care. She nurtured his interests in art, in Shakespeare, in the quieter pleasures his parents sometimes had little patience for. Russell's book foregrounds this bond explicitly. The Queen Mother was always saying well done, always encouraging, always making room for Charles's temperament in ways his more duty-focused parents didn't. When she died in 2002, Charles moved into both Clarence House and her Scottish home Birkhall. The inheritance of her 2 most intimate properties passed to the grandchild, the biographical record documents most consistently as her surrogate son. The Andrew case rests on different evidence. Forum discussions and popular commentary insist on his centrality to her warmth, citing the way he carried himself, his confidence, the social ease she recognized and rewarded. Her equerry, Major Colin Burgess, recorded one revealing detail. Even after Andrew's 1996 divorce, even through the embarrassments that followed, the Queen Mother would sigh and say quietly, "You know, Andrew does love her so." She was also, by documented account, furious when Andrew participated in the 1987 It's a Royal Knockout television spectacle, the charity program that dressed senior royals in medieval costume and subjected them to humiliating physical competitions. She told him it had reduced the royals to the ranks of second-rate comedians, and her face, as the royal expert Ross Benson recorded in 1993, was white with rage. But she didn't cut him off. She never did. What this channel is proposing, and this is the interpretive frame, not a settled biographical fact, is that the traits Andrew absorbed from the Queen Mother were the transmissible ones. The expectation that every room would make room for him. The conviction that expenses existed to be incurred. The deep certainty that the rules governing other people's behavior were guidelines rather than constraints. The Queen Mother had all of those traits. The documented record confirms every one of them. What she also had, and what Andrew apparently didn't inherit, at least not in lasting form, was the ability to make every person in a room feel that they were the one she had come to see. Andrew had charm as a young man. His Falklands service, flying Sea King helicopters during the 1982 war, serving as an operational pilot rather than a ceremonial one, gave him something real to stand on. That period was arguably the only sustained stretch of his adult life where his confidence and his actual record were aligned. After that, the gap widened. As UK Special Representative for International Trade and Investment from 2001 to 2011, Andrew incurred travel expenses that became a national running joke. The nickname Air Miles Andy accumulated detail by detail. An RAF aircraft to St. Andrews for a golf trip at a cost of £4,352. A near 29,000 Australian dollar taxpayer-funded private jet to a golf tournament in Australia. Hundreds of thousands of dollars logged in a single year for airborne transportation. After mounting criticism, he commissioned an independent strategic review of his own trade envoy role in 2008, a review that found his role, in its own words, unique and highly valuable. After the review, his government expenses budget increased by £5,000. He reportedly sublet 3 cottages on the Royal Lodge estate while paying a peppercorn rent on his own 75-year Crown estate lease, a lease he had secured in 2003 for a single £1 million premium and the commitment to spend £7.5 million on refurbishment of a 30-room house in Windsor Great Park. When King Charles sought, after Queen Elizabeth II's death, to have Andrew vacate the property, Andrew declined. Royal experts noted he refused to leave even temporarily without upgrades meeting royal standards. The entitlement was there throughout, at the trade envoy's desk, in the sublet cottages, in the lease that ran until 2078. Every one of these details rhymes with a woman whose overdraft at Coutts ran to £4 million and whose daughter quietly settled it from private funds. The difference is that the Queen Mother had a century of charm with which to make that behavior not just tolerable, but beloved. Andrew's social armor corroded under scrutiny. The entitlement remained. On the other side of this equation are 2 people who received less of the Queen Mother's doting warmth and built their lives accordingly. Lady Sarah Armstrong Jones was born on May 1, 1964, the daughter of Princess Margaret and Anthony Armstrong Jones. She is a professional painter. Since 1995, she has been represented by the Redfern Gallery in Mayfair, one of London's most established commercial galleries, where she has held regular solo exhibitions of new paintings and watercolors. In 2025, her work appeared in a Horatio's Garden charity auction, a piece titled Studio Window, listed alongside her name simply as Lady Sarah Chatto, an artist. In 2022, she attended the centennial exhibition of the Redfern Gallery as one of its in-house painters. Her work has sold at auction for up to £4,867. There is one small documented vignette that captures something about the dynamic. The Queen Mother reportedly telephoned Sarah's studio on an occasion when the young woman hadn't come to Royal Lodge, asking why she hadn't appeared. Sarah replied that she was working. The Queen Mother wasn't pleased, but Sarah was at her studio. David Armstrong Jones, born November 3, 1961, founded Linley, his furniture company, in 1985 in his mid-20s. The company website describes its origin modestly. It began modestly, with a world-renowned reputation for fusing striking design with exemplary craftsmanship built over decades. He trained as a craftsman, built a real brand, became chairman of Christie's UK, and spent the decades since building an identity that exists independently of his title. He became the 2nd Earl of Snowdon in 2017, but he had been building Linley for 32 years before he inherited that name. Neither of Margaret's children became entangled in sustained scandal. Neither required royal status to sustain their professional identity. Neither needed a favorable independent review to justify their expenses to the government. Christopher Warwick, whose 2000 biography of Princess Margaret was shaped in part by the princess herself, situated David and Sarah within a turbulent but formative household. Anne Glenconnor's proximity to that world adds texture. Their independence was shaped by many things: Margaret's own complicated mothering, their father's artistic world, the specific circumstances of a difficult marriage. The structural argument holds as a framework nonetheless. The grandchildren, who were less defined by the Queen Mother's version of royal identity, were free to build different ones. Whether that was a gift she intended is another matter entirely. August 4th, 2000. The Queen Mother is exactly 100 years old. She traveled that morning by open carriage from Clarence House along the Mall to Buckingham Palace. The yellow and blue of her racing colors decorating the carriage, Prince Charles seated beside her. More than 40,000 people had gathered on the Mall since daybreak. Canadian Girl Guides from Calgary had spent 3 years fundraising for the trip, selling 56,000 cookies and recycling 10 tons of telephone directories, to be in position 6 hours before the noon ceremony. CNN called her Britain's favorite royal. The BBC noted that no other king or queen in British history had lived so long, and that according to her family, she was still full of vigor, vitality, and enjoyment of life. A 41-gun salute fired from Green Park as the carriage arrived. She appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony in a pastel blue dress with her trademark pearls, flanked by Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Margaret, then joined by Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry. The RAF flypast came. The crowds cheered. The birthday card from the Queen, which her equerry opened with his sword, read a warm message signed simply, Lilibet. The media coverage was, as the occasion demanded, overwhelmingly reverential. The public myth was at its apex. What none of the 40,000 people on the Mall could see, the roughly £4 million overdraft sitting in a Coutts account at that moment. The documented expectation of deference that her household staff had spent decades navigating. The private assessments, hard as nails, stubborn, formidable, controlling, sitting in letters and diaries, waiting for the biographers to open them. The uneven warmth she had dispensed across 6 grandchildren over 5 decades, and what each of them had made of it. The public image was real. The things behind it were also real. On that August afternoon, both were equally present, and the 40,000 people on the Mall could only see one of them. She died on March 30th, 2002, at Royal Lodge, Windsor. She was 101. Princess Margaret had died 7 weeks before her mother. The estate, estimated at somewhere between £50 million and £70 million, was left in its entirety to Queen Elizabeth II, who used private funds to cover the Coutts overdraft. Charles moved into Clarence House. He also took Burke Hall. The 2 homes most associated with the Queen Mother's private life passed to the grandchild whose bond with her the biographical record documents most consistently. Andrew didn't inherit her homes. He had already secured Royal Lodge in 2003 under his own long-term lease. The 75-year arrangement, the peppercorn rent, the £7.5 million renovation commitment he would spend the following 2 decades citing as justification for staying. Intellectual honesty requires a note here. The argument that the Queen Mother's death specifically destabilized Andrew isn't cleanly supported by the documentary record. His most proximate protector, the person whose indulgence most directly sustained him in the years that followed, was his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. It was after her death in September 2022, not after the Queen Mother's in 2002, that the decisive dismantling began. The stripping of his HRH style in January 2022, the loss of military affiliations and patronages, the Royal Lodge standoff with King Charles, the stripping of the Prince title in October 2025, the departure from Royal Lodge in February 2026 to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. But the Queen Mother had transmitted something that outlasted the woman who gave it, the conviction that a royal, even a diminished one, even a disgraced one, was owed 30 rooms in Windsor Great Park and a lease running to 2078. The inability to read a room that had changed. The assumption that the institution would bend to accommodate the person, rather than the other way around. Sarah Chatto was at her studio, Her work appeared in charity auctions as recently as 2025. David Lindley's company had been running for 40 years. No sustained expenses controversies. No sublet cottages reported to a public spending watchdog. No reviews commissioned to confirm their own value. The contrast is documented. The causal interpretation is ours. One of the more interesting things about this argument is that part of the audience arrived at it independently. On an earlier video on this channel examining the Queen Mother's character, drawing on the same biographical sources, the same household accounts, the same documented entitlement, one comment gathered approximately 300 likes. It read, "Andrew took after his grandmother, rude, entitled, and living off the monarchy." That wasn't this channel's framing. That was a viewer reading the evidence and making the connection without being prompted. The institutions hadn't acknowledged it. The formal record hadn't assembled it. But the pattern was visible enough that someone in front of a screen reached the same conclusion the biographers hedge around. What this video has tried to do is build the scaffolding around that observation. Show where the parallel holds, where it requires careful labeling as interpretation rather than proof, and what it tells us about how certain kinds of love function as legacy. She is remembered as the grandmother of the nation, the smile, the gin, the wartime courage, the 100 candles on the centenary cake. But inside the family, she was something more particular and more consequential. A woman whose love was a kind of estate, and who left it to her grandchildren in wildly unequal shares. The one she could never refuse inherited her certainty and her entitlement, and the world watched it curdle into the most disastrous royal career of the modern age. And the ones who stood a little further from the warmth inherited almost nothing from her, and were quietly, accidentally, set free. That is the cruelty and the mercy of the Queen Mother in one sentence. The grandchild she loved most, she ruined. And the grandchildren she overlooked, she released. She chose. And every one of them is still living inside the choice. Subscribe for more stories like this.